Nick Tracy went with his wife Annie to the party. He didn't want to go, and he didn't want her to go either, but she insisted. The party was at the home of famous football player Mike White. White, who's 34 and retired after leading his team to last year's Super Bowl, is large, blonde, and wealthy. He made his fortune by investing money from sponsors through Annie's company, and more recently, directly with Annie. Annie, 30, works as a financial expert at Bragg Incorporated, which works with many athletes and celebrities. She's a stunning blonde. Nick, almost 6 feet tall with a medium build, considers himself fortunate to have married Annie 8 years ago in college. Their son Travis, who's 7, looks just like Nick. Nick wasn't always big. As a child, he was small and poor. His father Greg, a sergeant in the Army, served at the same base throughout Nick's life. Nick, an only child, faced challenges with bigger kids in the neighborhood, but his mother Nora, a second-generation Vietnamese, couldn't protect him while staying at home. At 7, after losing a race, Nick's father sent him to a family friend, Jojo Nolan, who taught Nick to fight at Jojo's dojo. Nick excelled learning to control his emotions, crucial for effective fighting. Despite being small, Nick went to the dojo 4 days a week, treating it like church and wrestling like religion. Nick's parents were initially unsure about him attending the dojo, but Nick proved his intelligence, consistently getting A's in school and explaining to them the importance of controlling emotions in martial arts. At 9, Nick kicked a bigger kid at school but managed to contain his rage, earning respect and no longer becoming a target. At 16, Nick grew taller, and at 17 he gained strength, becoming slightly less agile, but Jojo helped him manage it. At 18, right after high school, Nick was impressive. Because of his great grades, he went to the local university without having to pay. He studied math and computers, but his main focus was business. It was during his 3rd and 4th years of college that he met Annie in his business classes. They hit it off immediately because of their smarts and shared interests. Before long, they became romantically involved and found they were a perfect match in bed. Both Nick and Annie loved adventure and excitement, but they kept their escapades between themselves mostly. Sometimes Nick wished Annie could be like Jamie Lee Curtis, his favorite actress from the movie Blue Steel. And sometimes Annie would indulge his fantasies, but they both knew it was just for fun. When they decided to get married, they didn't draw up a formal contract, but they made a serious commitment to each other. After finishing school, Annie quickly started making good money, almost as smart as Nick. Well, almost. Her job at Bragg was briefly interrupted by the birth of their son, Travis. Meanwhile, Nick worked from home as a computer programmer for a local company. When Travis was born, Nick became the primary caregiver while also keeping an eye on Annie's work. He took some extra cash he made from a successful programming project and invested it in a startup he found through Annie's connections. The startup, a matchmaking service, turned out to be profitable. Nick made a tidy sum when it went public and decided to retire, fearing others would copy the idea. He shared his concerns with Annie, who then advised her clients to exit as well. This decision led to the downfall of the matchmaking venture. Meanwhile, Nick made some shrewd financial moves, including possibly illegal short selling, without Annie's knowledge. 5 years into their marriage, Nick started to notice changes in Annie's behavior, so he kept quiet about his growing business success. He even started his own company, doing programming work for government agencies. His new job required security clearance, which he obtained and used to learn more about Annie, uncovering some surprising information. Annie had risen to prominence at her company, earning more money than Nick expected. When Nick delved into their finances, he discovered she had an investment account with her company. It wasn't illegal, all public knowledge, but Annie hadn't mentioned it. They both contributed to a joint account, but filed taxes separately. Despite being a financial expert, Annie didn't pay much attention to her computer, only using it for investments. So Nick had a pretty good idea of what was happening in her life. He didn't pry too much, especially about work matters. However, after finding the investment account, he thoroughly searched her laptop and a new phone she received for work. Nick noticed Annie's focus on her work with celebrities, which didn't raise any red flags, as that's what he was interested in too. They often attended parties hosted by various celebrities and wealthy individuals, about 5 or 6 times a year. Usually, Nick enjoyed these parties, even though Annie tended to forget about him once they arrived. But she always left with him, and never stayed away long enough to arouse suspicion. Their sex life was still great, almost as good as before. Sometimes Nick felt like Annie's mind was elsewhere, maybe once a month. That's why he began checking up on her more frequently. But ultimately, he concluded that she was just busy with work. Everything proceeded as usual until she became Mike White's client. White was married to actress Jill Slayton. She was appealing, and they had two daughters, aged 6 and 8. Annie's predecessor was Jake Blake. He was reckless and caused issues by poaching the Whites' clients and attempting to seduce Jill Slayton. He didn't entirely succeed, but Jill was influenced enough for Mike to notice, so Jake departed and Annie got his position. A part of why she secured it was because she was a woman, and Mike requested it. Annie didn't know Mike specifically requested her. When Annie acquired White as a client, she began spending more time at work and went to lunch with Mike and Jill. Jill knew Mike wanted Annie to handle his investments, so she joined them for lunch to see what was happening. Surprisingly, she wasn't entirely opposed to Mike having relations with Annie. She herself desired to be intimate with her co-star in an upcoming film. She thought if Mike slept with Annie, he couldn't complain about her and Dirk Madden unless it became public. During lunch, she noticed Mike's keen interest in Annie. He tried to appear professional, but she knew him well. Annie was unaware. Jill even pondered if Annie would yield to Mike. She observed Annie, aware that she was married with a child, but her husband stayed home and seemed average, so she thought Mike might succeed. She didn't care about Annie's marriage or family. If Annie messed up, it would be her own fault. Jill and Mike had been married for nearly 10 years. In the early years, Mike strayed a bit while on the road. It didn't bother her much. She did the same. But in the last 6 years, after they both confessed their infidelities, they promised to salvage their marriage, and they succeeded. However, now Mike desired his financial advisor. She was attractive, but still. Jill dealt with attractive men hitting on her, including recently with Dirk. She felt tempted. She decided a brief affair wouldn't ruin their marriage. They both loved their children and each other. They'll forgive each other. Maybe they'll even find a different way to handle things. Mike was one of the best lovers Jill had ever had. Giving him up would be difficult, but she believed a lack of variety could spice up their bedroom life. After dinner, Jill bantered with Mike as they drove home. "Did you have a crush on that woman? I noticed everything, no matter how hard you tried to hide it from me. Sorry, but we made a promise and I'll stick to it. What if I let you off the hook? Will you do the same for me?" "Why?" "Because of that guy, Dirk. I don't believe the rumors about his manhood, but maybe you do. Just gossip, no first-hand experience, but we'll be working together for 2 months, and he'll try to flirt with me to show off. And you're curious to see if it works. Maybe if he fails, it'll just be a one-time thing." "Jill, I can't agree. We have a family, and we're going to stick together. I'll always love you the most. Another woman won't change that. She never has before. Plus, I see what you're planning for that woman, and she's married, Mike, with a child, not to mention my husband." Mike gazed at her. "You're suggesting something like a trade, tit for tat, more like swapping breasts for a man's thing. But yes, you'll have to make every effort to keep this a secret. I don't want our names in the papers or online. That'll be my main condition for him. If he breaks it, I'll let you break it. I'll say you're a jealous husband with a lot of friends who have guns. Is that clear?" "Maybe. Let me ponder on it. You know what? It's possible she won't succumb to your advances. Wouldn't that be great? No substitutes. The deal is just for her." "You think I can't win her over?" "Nonsense. Prove it. I don't believe in just words." She smirked, and once again I realized men are so straightforward. And that's how Annie became Mike White's target. After lunch, Annie headed back to her office. She wasn't as oblivious as the famous couple thought. She just knew how to keep a poker face in public. She noticed Mike's excitement during lunch, though Jill didn't seem to. Yet it appeared Jill sensed it too. Annie pondered who stirred him up so much. She concluded it must be her, not his wife of 10 years, no matter how appealing she was. Annie had to decide what to do about Mike. Keeping his account was a significant move for her, but she didn't truly need it. What did she need? If she were honest, she knew she could accept Mike's offer. He was big, confident, and attractive. Her husband Nick was sturdy but lacked charm. Another factor was Mike's well-endowed stature, as she noticed during lunch. It intrigued her. Mike, married to a glamorous movie star, showed interest in Annie, but she didn't need the ego boost. She had a family and a wonderful husband, Nick, and she didn't want to risk losing them. She knew that any secret relationship with Mike would eventually hurt Nick and their kids too much, so she decided to stay away from Mike. Yet Mike didn't give up. As his wife Jill's movie shoot approached, he started chasing Annie more aggressively. At first, he was subtle, but then he became more insistent. Annie felt attracted to him but kept turning him down. After one business meeting, she momentarily gave in to a kiss in her office, but she quickly stopped it, remembering her commitment to Nick. Mike tried to persuade her, saying, "Let's do this, Annie. No one will know. We both want it." Annie, nearly crying, stood firm. I promised Nick, and I won't break that promise. I just can't. Mike left her office frustrated and took out his anger on Jill when he got home, leading to a passionate encounter. The experience was intense for Jill. She thrived on Mike's rough passion, the perfect match for her wild side. Afterward, they lay exhausted, reeling like they'd weathered a storm. Jill playfully remarked, I think your financial advisor keeps you on edge to my benefit. I'm rooting for her, not you, but if she causes you more trouble, I might step in. Mike replied, I'll push her away. She's too loyal to her husband. It's really admirable. Why not just leave her be? If you win her over, she'll only look foolish because of you. I can't just watch while you chase someone else. I bet he's nothing special, but you won't care, right? I told you if he lets you down, it'll just be a one-time thing. I might have to deal with Annie myself, Jill. She really bothers me. Then wait until after filming. We don't want to ruin the movie, but imagine the box office boost if he suddenly died right before its release. They laughed. Mike thought it over. He was pretty sure Annie felt as strongly about him as he did about her. Their kiss was passionate. She had gasped at the sensation, but he didn't want to pressure her. As Jill prepared for filming, Mike had a proposal for Annie. Annie, I respect your dedication to your marriage, but listen, I'm planning a party in Black Rock. It'll be fun with lots of cool people. Remember you mentioned your husband's crush on Jamie Lee Curtis? So what? She's not the same as in his favorite movie anymore. Mike showed her a photo of Samantha Jordan, an actress in Jill's new film, who looks strikingly similar. This is Samantha Jordan. She's in Jill's movie and might come to the party. And I can get her to flirt with Nick in character. She's 24, fun, and willing, according to Jill. Then, while Jill's with Dirk and Samantha with Nick, you and I could have our time. You mean, let him be distracted by her while we're together? Jill will be busy too. It sounds cozy for a weekend, but if Nick finds out I orchestrated this, he won't be happy. He's not the forgiving type when he's upset. Could he really hurt you? Don't worry about me, Mike. No fights. I always have security at these parties. Besides, he's into martial arts, but it's not a big deal. Mike smiled, pleased with the plan. This conversation took place over lunch in a dimly lit restaurant booth, where Mike kissed Annie passionately, and she reciprocated, touching him intimately. He considered going further, but decided it was too risky. Eventually, Annie pushed him away, exclaiming in surprise and calling for the waiter, who arrived and said nothing about the scene. Mike paid the bill, and they left. Driving back from lunch, Annie thought about the upcoming Black Rock party on Friday afternoon, anticipating bands, celebrities, and even some athletes. She was concerned about inviting her husband, Nick, knowing he wasn't open to other partners and would likely see through the setup. She figured he'd refuse to go if she told him the true nature of the party. That evening, while enjoying a roast chicken dinner prepared by Nick, Annie brought up the party. Nick, Mike and Jill are throwing a big party this Friday before she heads out for filming. It's going to be full of celebrities. We're invited. Nick, aware of Annie's dealings with Mike and suspecting Mike's intentions, responded with concern. I've been thinking about Mike White. It seems he's getting too close for comfort. He's clearly pursuing you, and I'm worried it might lead to trouble. I haven't encouraged him. He's been forward, but I always turn him down. But you haven't been very clear with your refusals, have you? And you haven't mentioned any of this before. Nick, I think we should go to this party together. I haven't changed. But maybe you should consider dropping him as a client, like you did with that last guy. Now it's Mike showing interest. Maybe he should look elsewhere. I'm not going to do that. He's tempting, but I'm not giving in. And I really don't want to attend this party. He'll be there trying his hardest to win you over. It could end badly. Nick, he's just one guy, and there will be security. I can take care of myself. Annie knew Nick was trained in martial arts, though she wasn't fully aware of his capabilities or the potential risks at the party. Nick understood her stance but remained opposed. Despite the potential dangers, Annie was set on going her own way. That Friday, after school, Nick drove their son Travis to his grandparents' house in the next county, planning to pick him up on Sunday evening. The real reason Nick agreed to go to the party was to confront Mike and settle their issues once and for all. He was tired of the ongoing tension and increasingly angry about it. Black Rock, the venue for the party, was Mike and Jill's expansive country estate, named after a large dark rock in the lake there. The property boasted a mansion, a pool, a tennis court, and a ballroom. The party was scheduled to start at 7, featuring a buffet and open bar, with a casual dress code. When Annie came downstairs, she looked stunning in a navy blue dress that was seemingly casual yet strikingly attractive. Nick, though unsettled by her appearance, was dressed in slacks, a silk black and white shirt, trousers, and practical yet stylish loafers. Seeing Annie, he joked, "Looks like we should just stay home and have fun. That's what you dressed up for, right?" Annie blushed. "Do I look good?" "You look amazing, as always." "Just wondering who you dressed up for," Nick replied, his tone serious. "For you, baby, all for you. Can't we just stay here and have fun? We need to make a good impression with the movie stars and celebrities. You look great too." Still unsure, Nick smiled and turned on the stereo, playing Phil Collins' Live Tonight, a song he often practiced martial arts to. It had the perfect mix of anger, rhythm, and drums that he needed. As the music played, he danced with Annie briefly before leading her out the door. On their way out, fueled by the song, he jumped and kicked a branch on a tulip poplar tree in their yard. The tune played in his mind all the way to the party, preparing him for whatever might come. When they arrived at the house, there were parking attendants, but Nick chose to park the car himself, still tipping them before finding a spot easy to exit from quickly. He tipped the parking attendant again to ensure a smooth experience. Annie was puzzled by Nick's behavior, from the song he played at the door to his unexpected aggression toward a tree branch, and now his insistence on parking the car himself. As they walked to the main entrance, she questioned him about his actions and the song. "It's like you're preparing for a battle," she said. "Yes," was all he replied. Annie looked at him and pleaded, "Nick, let's just have some fun tonight. Relax and enjoy yourself. I need a good time, and maybe you do too. Let's just see how it goes. If things turn sour, it could be the end for us. I know you're smart, Nick. Oh no, everything might be ruined before it even starts." But then she thought of Samantha and felt a glimmer of hope. As they approached the entrance, Mike and Jill were already there to greet them, with Samantha scheduled to arrive shortly after. Jill hugged Nick warmly, looking radiant and smelling wonderful. Mike embraced Annie, complimenting her on how she looked, then turned to Nick with a firm handshake. "You're Nick. We've heard about you. Nice to meet you." Mike's grip was uncomfortably tight. "Ease up, Mike," Nick responded with a forced smile. "Nice to meet you too." The interaction paused awkwardly, prompting Jill to suggest, "Why don't we head inside and meet the rest of our guests?" Inside, the party was in full swing. They were introduced to a group that included 4 or 5 football players, some with their wives, actors like Dirk, 2 boxers, and many other attractive guests. The place was bustling. Nick made his way around the party, picking up a salad from the buffet. He struck up a conversation with one of the boxers who seemed to be pitching something. Opting for seltzer, Nick planned on staying sober that evening. While mingling, Nick saw Mike approach Annie and gently take her by the elbow. She responded with a seductive smile, but then said something that surprised Nick. Mike looked over and waved to Jill, who briefly stepped away and returned with a striking woman. Nick was taken aback as Jill introduced her as Samantha Jordan, her talented co-star. For a moment, Nick was captivated. In his view, Samantha was the most stunning woman there, outshining both Annie and Jill. "Finally!" he blurted out. "Hello? You're amazing!" Samantha, used to attention, was pleasantly surprised by Nick's sincerity and smiled back. She quickly understood her role for the evening. Despite Jill's remark that Nick was ordinary, Samantha found him intriguing and notably strong, which surprised Jill given Samantha's clear interest. Regaining her composure, Samantha took Nick by the elbow and suggested they head towards the pool for some privacy. She was open to getting closer, and it seemed Nick might be too. They made small talk by the pool, discussing her acting career and his job, maintaining eye contact throughout. As they chatted, Samantha's attraction grew and she openly expressed her interest in spending the night with him. Their intense connection was noticeable to everyone around. Meanwhile, Annie and Mike hit the dance floor. Annie had seen Nick with Samantha and, after a brief dance, she and Mike drifted towards the bar. Jill and Dirk joined Annie, and she quickly asked about Nick's reaction to Samantha. Jill seemed uneasy, which didn't escape Annie. Suddenly, an alarm went off. "What's going on?" Annie asked. Jill looked worried and said, "I think they've fallen for each other. It's quite something." Annie was shocked. "Where are they?" "By the pool?" She hurried over and saw what everyone else did, 2 people completely enthralled with each other. She turned to Jill and asked, "Is this an act, or is it real?" "It's real. Falling in love isn't just lust. It's incredible," Jill admitted. "It looks like your plan to distract Mike worked. He's all yours today, maybe even longer, given how things look over there." Annie remarked, feeling a mix of emotions. Meanwhile, Samantha decided to be honest with Nick. She explained she was meant to distract him, like a consolation prize. Nick was conflicted. Sam, I can't do this. I have strong feelings for you. They didn't plan this. Call me if you feel the same. Maybe we can work something out, he said. I'll call you, Sam. You're the woman of my dreams. I've fallen for you, Nick confessed. Sam quickly kissed Nick and walked to the parking lot. Nick watched her leave, lost in thought and the rhythm of a song playing in his head. Determined, he went to find Annie. He wasn't going to let her be intimate today unless it was with him. He found Annie slow dancing with Mike, the last couples on the dance floor. Their intimacy was subtle compared to Jill and Dirk, who shared a kiss. Annie was wrestling with her feelings for her husband and her attraction to Mike. Mike's physical allure overwhelmed her, pushing her doubts away. Swept up in the moment, Annie let Mike pull her close, his hands wandering more boldly. He kissed her gently, then with increasing intensity. Caught in the tide of desire, Annie felt adrift. Just then, Nick rounded the corner, moving in time with his music. 2 security guards approached him, but he wasn't concerned. He saw them as all muscle, no threat. Nick tapped Mike on the shoulder. I'm cutting in, he said firmly. Mike snapped back. Go find Sam. Today Annie's with me. I sent Sam away. She's gone. Annie is free and she's my wife. Back off, Nick retorted. Mike walked away and signaled his guards. As they approached, Nick warned Annie, You set me up. If you stay, it's over. There's no turning back. I won't let you sleep with him. I'll take him out if I have to. Everyone stopped, struck by Nick's intensity. Though Mike sensed his determination, he couldn't grasp the depth of Nick's resolve. He motioned to his guards, making Annie tense with fear and dousing any remaining desire. Annie protested, I don't see why you're against this. You liked Samantha. We could have had fun. I can't allow it. We made promises and I'm keeping mine. You'll keep yours, like it or not, at least for tonight. If you want someone else, we can divorce. But your plan ends here, Nick declared firmly. Jill stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. Mike, let it go. I won't be with Dirk. He's making a fuss over nothing, she said. Mike turned to Annie. Do you want to leave with him? If I stay, something bad will happen, Annie replied. Get this guy out of here, Mike ordered his security. They grabbed Nick by each arm. Nick glanced at Annie, who stood frozen, then faced Mike. In less than 10 seconds, he took down the 2 guards. He stomped on one's foot and punched the other in the throat. Turning back, he hit the first one in the throat again. They dropped like trees. The rhythm of his song played clearly in his mind, energizing him. Mike panicked, realizing he was in real danger. He swung at Nick and missed. Nick dodged, laughing slightly, then hit Mike in the groin and under the ear, sending him to the ground. The women were shocked by how quickly Nick took down the guards and Mike. Before they could react, Nick was ready to strike Mike again. Driven by the music in his heart, Nick raised his leg over Mike. But then Annie screamed, No, Nicky, no, he's not worth it. Nick paused, hearing the fear in her cry. He hesitated, leaving Mike on the ground but still conscious. As an athlete, Mike was tough, but he was no match for Nick. In a moment of panic, Mike fled towards the pool, running for his life. He reached the deep end, collided with the diving board, and knocked himself unconscious. He sank underwater, unable to swim. Jill screamed and ran after him as she saw Mike submerged. Nick and Annie hurried over too. Without hesitating, Nick kicked off his boots, dove in, and quickly brought Mike back to the surface. He dragged him to the poolside and pushed him onto the concrete. Climbing out, Nick positioned Mike to clear his lungs, pressing down until water gushed out, and Mike started coughing. Nick turned to Jill. Call 911, he commanded, and she ran inside. Mike was still coughing, but beginning to breathe more easily. Nick made sure he was out of immediate danger, and then walked away. Annie watched him, feeling a mix of shock and numbness. Nick then checked on the 2 guards. They were awake and needed medical attention, but were stable. Drenched, Nick sat on the front steps to wait for the emergency services. Soon, police cars and ambulances arrived, stirring up commotion as they took care of everyone involved. Nick remained seated, observing as the 2 guards managed to get up, though they were later taken to the hospital. Mike, now stable but still needing care, was also transported by ambulance. Jill came up to Nick, offering, I'll get you some dry clothes. Come with me. He followed her upstairs. In the master bedroom closet, she handed him an oversized t-shirt and sweater. Heading towards the bathroom to change, Jill stopped him. Change here. I want to see what she lost. Nick shed his shirt, having already left his shoes by the pool. He peeled off his socks and pants, standing in just his wet boxers. Catching Jill's eye, He hesitated briefly before removing them too, despite his discomfort. She handed him sweatpants, which he pulled on quickly, then donned a t-shirt and sweater. "You're incredibly fit. Too good to be true. What's the deal with Annie?" Nick asked as he finished dressing. "How should I know? Maybe she's looking for something different, maybe someone famous, but I think she's just tired." "Mike's a handsome guy, isn't he?" Jill responded. "Yeah, he is. You know, Jill, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Maybe you could chat with Samantha, too." "She seems like she's going places," Nick suggested. "She definitely caught my eye. She's something special," Nick admitted. "Maybe Annie bit off more than she could chew. But you have a kid to think about. I stayed with Mike mainly for the kids. He's good-looking, but on set, I was tempted by Dirk. Where is he, by the way? He disappeared when everything went down. I guess he's not the hero type after all. I think Mike's going to rethink things with Annie." "Maybe you're interested in Samantha?" Jill mused. "Maybe so. What goes around comes around," Nick replied with a grin. "But remember, if you ever need anything, I'm here." "I'll keep that in mind," Jill chuckled. "Let's see how things pan out for Annie, and for Sam, too." Descending to the ground floor, Nick and Jill ran into Annie coming out of the cafeteria where the police were stationed. Annie eyed them suspiciously. "What are you two up to?" "You look a bit guilty yourself," Jill shot back. "I just gave Nick some fresh clothes and watched him change." "You're being ridiculous, Annie." With that, Jill walked away. A police detective then signaled for Nick. Sitting across from the officers, Nick faced an older white man who looked uneasy. The female detective, elegant and somewhat attractive, took the lead. "Are you some kind of magician?" "No, but I'm good at what I do. I had to learn early on. Tell me what happened," Nick replied. Nick explained everything as he remembered it, clear despite the 2 hours since the incident. "Were you planning to kill Mr. White?" Detective Bright asked. "It's hard to say. My wife's scream stopped me. I wouldn't have gone through with it after that. Did I save his life? I couldn't just watch him drown. I wasn't thinking about killing anymore. Plus, dealing with the body would complicate things more. You know, he hit me first. Well, I defended myself. That was after I took down his guards." "That lines up with your story. Are you arresting me?" "That's for the prosecutor to decide. This case will draw attention, so we'll see. The new prosecutor leans liberal, so it's up in the air. You're free to go for now." "All right, just so you know, this house has surveillance cameras. We're checking the footage now. We'll contact you if we need more information. Don't worry about Mike White trying to hit me. He's harmless," Bright joked, while Stevens remained silent. Nick wasn't laughing. Back on the main landing, Nick found Annie seated on the stairs with Jill. He told her, "I'm leaving. You can come with me or stay." Annie stood up, turned to Jill, and said, "Thanks for the memorable evening." Jill smiled. "Hopefully our next party will be quieter, and I hope you two work things out." She looked at Annie. "I meant what I said. He's remarkable in his own way. You missed out. Sam won't make the same mistake if she has the chance." Annie and Nick got into the car and drove home, arriving around 2:30 a.m. After quick showers, Annie fell asleep quickly and Nick wasn't far behind, drifting off within minutes. They both overslept the next morning. Nick got up around 10 and went to the kitchen to make breakfast, starving since he'd barely eaten at the party. He was eating cereal when Annie appeared, dressed in a faded pink sleeveless dress that Nick loved. Nick glanced up but continued eating. Breaking the silence, he said, "I'm not that easy to win over. Even if I were, it'd just be physical." He smiled. "But hey, that'd be a good start. Just say the word. I owe you, and I'm ready to make it up to you again and again." Despite his thoughts wandering to Samantha occasionally, Nick was clearly taken with Annie. "I'm sorry for trying to manipulate you. It was wrong, and I hope you can forgive me someday." "Until then, I'm here for you," Annie said, giving him a meaningful look. "In the last few hours, 2 movie stars and my very attractive wife have come on to me, and I resisted them all. More than you would have with Mike." "Mike? That's saying something." "Well, you handled him well. I knew you were skilled from our dojo days, but Annie, you're good at a lot of things. Maybe you just don't show off enough. Remember I told you about my hobby?" "Yes, you mentioned it. Can I come to the dojo with you sometime?" "Why?" She blushed. "Because it's incredibly sexy. Watching you, thinking about you taking those guys down, even Mike, it was almost too much. I'm completely yours." She then stood up and took off her dress, revealing she was wearing nothing underneath. He looked her over, noticing her eagerness. Standing, he gestured to the floor beside the kitchen table, and she immediately knelt down, understanding his hint. It was a bit challenging given his state, but she was enthusiastic. Impressed by her vigor, he picked her up and carried her to the living room sofa, bending her over its back. She anticipated his moves, shifting in anticipation. He joined her, the rough fabric of the sofa adding to the sensation. She reached her peak quickly, her response intense as he continued, finally reaching his own climax. Nick felt a renewed attraction between them. Their previous encounters had been lackluster compared to this fiery reconnection at Black Rock. Now, her desire was unmistakable, igniting his own. His mind wandered to Samantha and even Jill, each stirring feelings that threatened to complicate his marriage. He pondered the implications of these attractions, recognizing the complexity of his desires and the need to make careful choices. Annie whispered, playfully touching him. Looks like we're in for quite the adventure. They spent Saturday lost in each other, exploring different expressions of their passion until Nick was utterly spent by 10 that evening. I win the Zex Marathon, Annie declared, half teasing, half serious. You put up a good fight, but I've got the upper hand. Her words hinted at her continued desire. As Nick drifted off to sleep with a laugh, he remained unaware of her deeper wishes. Sunday morning was more subdued. Annie made pancakes, lavishing them with real maple syrup. Taking the last one, she teasingly rubbed it against herself before offering it to Nick with a playful, "Looks like my eyes were bigger than my stomach. Want the last pancake?" Nick eagerly ate it, enjoying every trace of syrup. Annie was delighted by how such a simple act could captivate him. Afterwards, his face was amusingly messy. Annie then pushed him down on the carpet and straddled him, licking the syrup off his face while they moved together. They climaxed together before collapsing, faces smeared with syrup, a reminder of their indulgent morning. The syrup was real Vermont maple, rich and slightly unusual, but delicious all the same. The rest of the day passed quietly. Exhausted, Nick and Annie decided to unwind with a walk in the local park and a simple picnic, leaving pancakes behind. Back home, Annie brought up the unsettling events of Friday. Nick immediately dismissed it with a shake of his head. No, Annie looked surprised. Why not? We love each other, don't we? You tried to break our promises? I need clarity. You know I have other options. Sam, I should have guessed. Damn. You used what you know about me to push me to break my vow, just so Mike could have his way. It was just physical attraction. He chased me relentlessly. He's attractive. But think about it. If your plan had worked, we'd be heading for a breakup anyway. No, why? Because it would have meant a total loss of trust and respect. Annie looked down. I didn't think it all the way through. When Mike signaled his guys, I looked at you, thinking they'd throw me out. Oh, Annie, they were intimidating, I understand. And if they had thrown me out, you and Mike would have been together, and that would have been it for us. I might have left with you, Nick. Lust over loyalty. I highly doubt that. It's humiliating. I can't go through that again. Now I know what you're capable of, and it worries me. Annie, I don't want your loyalty just because you think I'm the strongest. I thought our love meant more. But when you suggested Mike could just get rid of me, you showed where your heart was leaning. She burst into tears and ran upstairs. He stayed put, knowing his words had struck a chord. Nick grabbed a couple of beers and settled in to watch a baseball game. Normally, a tough decision or stressful moment would send him deep into thought, wrestling with questions. But not today. Today, he was completely absorbed in the game, letting the simplicity of baseball take over. After the game ended, he pondered the inevitable question. What are my options? The first is to stick with Annie. The second is to give Samantha a shot and see where it leads. Third, have a fling with Jill, then play the field for a bit. Or he mused, maybe all three. Haha, but that's unrealistic, just a fantasy. And recent events had shown him the repercussions when fantasies become reality. Life turns sour. Nick rose from his seat and headed upstairs to bed. Annie was already asleep. He kissed her forehead and settled in beside her, falling asleep himself. When they woke up, he kissed her again and said nothing more. They dressed, and Annie went to work. On Monday, Nick phoned Samantha, explaining that he was going to give his marriage with Annie another try. He asked her to reach out when she returned from filming. She agreed, adding, Annie is lucky to have you, Nick. If things get too tough, please call. Please. Oh, I'll definitely call. Next, Nick called Jill. Jill, how's Mike doing? He's getting discharged from the hospital today. His private parts are swollen. Not surprising. I'd like to talk to him if possible. Could you ask him to reach out when he's ready? I don't want to start a fight. I'll check. I'll go get him now. Later that day, Nick visited Mike and Jill's apartment in the city. Mike was seated on the couch. "What's up? Sorry for not getting up. I wanted to say that I've decided to give my marriage a shot. I'm not thrilled about the effort you put into ruining things, but I get it. Famous guy. Sometimes acts like a jerk. Yeah, I messed up. I can be a jerk, to Annie and to you. But that's not always who I am. Then why now? I found her incredibly attractive, sexy, and intelligent. So intelligent. Sorry. If she's still your advisor, can you let her go?" "Sure. Especially since you might just kill me if I don't. It's bad for both of us, especially for me, something like that." "All right, I'll keep my word. I'll back off." Jill, who overheard them, chimed in, "I'll make sure he's satisfied. I'll escort him to the shoot and handle your excess enthusiasm." Nick grinned. "He's a lucky guy, and he knows it. Right, dear?" "I know. I just forgot for a bit. By the way, Nick, thanks for pulling me out of the pool. But why did you do it?" "I couldn't bear to see you drown, but if you watch the footage, you'll see how I hesitated before diving. I'm still trying to figure you out." He gestured to his groin. "It hurts, but at least I'm alive." "Yeah, it's a tough situation. Look, I don't have anything against you if you leave her be. Actually, I might not stay with her. If I leave, you might have a shot. But ask first." "Why would you leave her? I don't get it," Mike interjected. "Recent events, like this dumb plot to shuffle things around so you could be with her, that's been weighing on my mind. What if I hadn't acted as fast as I did? Your guards might have thrown me out, and where would Annie have gone?" "I don't have an answer to that question," Jill added. "I bet she would have gone home with you. She didn't want to end the marriage. I wanted my stallion to have her here, while you got Sam. A dream scenario for you. But once Sam left, the plan fell apart." Annie stepped toward Mike. "I saw it on the video. You should watch it too. I think she might have gone with me. Or maybe not. I'm just confused." While he mainly addressed Jill, Mike jumped in. "When it comes to lust and sex, women are just as susceptible as men. I put in a lot of effort to get under Annie's skin, and damn, she resisted. She wanted me, but she fought it. She never went to a motel with me or let me have my way with her on her table. We have to give her credit, but I'm not a pushover." Nick nodded. "All right, I'll give her credit. Maybe I'm overanalyzing. We were fine for a long time. But man, it got bad." Jill reassured. "Give her time. By the way, Sam asked about you. Well, you know what happened there. Though she was all ready to climax over the phone. It's about Annie's chances. What's up with women? Is it like the caveman days? Beat up your husband, get the wife. It's wild. Honey, I think it's hard-coded in their genes. Once a woman realizes you're the decider of fates, she wants you. Same goes for Annie, right?" "Yeah, same here." She eyed him as if she were ready to whisk him upstairs right then and there. Mike growled, but he could barely move. Nick said, "I better go. Jill, you've been one of the options on my mind, but I need to talk to Annie." Nick departed with visible excitement. Upon Annie's return from work, he promptly escorted her upstairs while Travis watched TV. Nick playfully tossed Annie onto the bed and passionately made love to her until she climaxed. Though his focus wasn't solely on satisfying her, she still experienced a powerful climax. With heavy breathing, Annie inquired about his day as he rose from the bed. Nick chuckled and she joined in, impressed by her own wit. He recounted his visit to Mike and Jill, highlighting how Jill aroused him without physical touch. Annie then asked about dinner. "Pizza, then more intimacy," Nick replied. She agreed, and this time they took their time, thoroughly enjoying each other's company. After dinner, Travis retired to his room to study, prompting Annie to broach the topic of their relationship. She expressed regret for reacting to Nick's alpha male nature. Nick mentioned Jill exhibiting similar behavior. "Yeah, and now you've surpassed her husband, the former alpha male. How's he doing, by the way?" Annie inquired. "He'll recover. His reproductive organs were swollen, but Jill's taking care of him, and he won't be having relations with that fool Dirk." Annie and Nick shared a dynamic where he could have what he desired when he desired it, which he appreciated. Yet in a peculiar way, he found himself weary of it. Annie's extreme submissiveness began to wear on him. 6 weeks later, Jill and Mike returned, inviting Annie and Nick to Black Rock for another party with the film's cast and crew. Nick and Annie felt uncertain, but ultimately decided to attend. It was a movie-centric gathering, devoid of athletes except for Mike. Annie drove, and they were greeted by the valet and Jill at the door, followed closely by Samantha and a handsome, dark-haired man named Vince Capp. "Sam, you know Annie and Nick. Guys, meet Vince Capp, also starring in the film," Jill introduced. Vince quipped, Unless they cut me out during editing. Don't worry, they won't. Women need something to drool over, Sam reassured. As they entered, Nick felt a twinge of jealousy towards Vince and Sam. At the buffet, Mike greeted them, sharing a cordial hug with Annie. They mingled with the film crew, including director Hector Salas and financier Blake Davis, who seemed preoccupied with each other. Nick hesitated to approach them, observing Hector's interest in Annie. Despite Hector's advances, Annie swiftly rebuffed him, knowing she could handle him confidently. The party went on for a while. Nick sipped beer and had kebabs, while Annie chatted with Vince near the pool, drawing attention from all sides. Samantha and Jill approached Nick, who was observing Annie. "Are you concerned?" Sam inquired. "No, I think we've reached a new understanding. How's it going with you and Vince?" "He's quite the looker, and she was flying solo," Sam responded. Nick glanced at Sam, who nodded. "That's about it. He's a player. Looks like he's trying his luck with Annie right now." "Well, she's her own person. If she falters, we're in trouble. But I have faith we'll be fine," Nick remarked. "I can't say I'm thrilled to hear that," Sam added. "Me neither," Jill chimed in. Nick chuckled. "Two incredibly attractive movie stars, darn it." They split up. Nick headed toward Annie, who was still chatting with Vince. Nick noticed Vince encroaching on her personal space slightly. He took her hand and asked, "So, Vince, what's it like working on a movie?" Vince replied, "I was just telling Annie it's hard work. Not at all glamorous." "Well, except for Sam." Vince grinned. "We've got to admit that." Nick then led Annie away to where Mike was standing alone. He didn't quite fit in with the movie crowd except for the two stuntmen. "How was it on set? You went, right?" Annie asked. "Yeah, lasted 2 weeks, but it wasn't exactly a blast. I only stayed for Jill's scenes, then left when her shoot ended. Didn't have to knock out any teeth," Mike replied. "That's good. Things could have gotten messy," Nick commented. They shared a laugh. Meanwhile, Dirk was on the other side of the pool, chatting up a young woman who seemed captivated by him. "This is one of the late extras. Probably hasn't seen him before. Looks like he's making some headway," Mike remarked. "I heard from a reliable source that he's got quite the package," Annie added. Mike glanced at her, and she clarified, "No, it's not Jill." Annie had a couple other clients who might have been romantically interested in Dirk. Nick asked, "Quite the package? What does that mean?" Annie shrugged. "I didn't pry." Nick nodded. "Fair enough." The evening carried on, with some people taking a dip in the pool, although not Mike. The highlight for Nick was when Samantha emerged in a bikini and started swimming, capturing the attention of almost all the male guests. When Sam jumped into the pool, Jill stood beside Nick, muttering, "Show off." Nick suggested, "You can take a dip too, but some guys might get too excited and I'll keep an eye out." Jill glanced at Nick, then smiled and replied, "I'll do it, if you do it too." Annie overheard and glanced at Nick, saying, "Well, now's the time to speak up or stay quiet. Just keep it casual, no lingering touches." Nick and Jill headed upstairs. Nick didn't have swim trunks, but there were various sizes available for guests. Jill tossed him a black thong, but he opted for a classic pair of swim trunks. She handed him blue ones instead. A compromise. Jill changed into a bikini while Nick watched with interest. She looked stunning. Gesturing to his swim trunks, she indicated it was his turn. Nick stripped down and struggled to get into his swim trunks, finding himself aroused by watching Jill. "Need some help?" she offered. "No," Nick declined. "Please, I've got enough issues as it is." He managed to squeeze into his trunks, losing his erection in the process. They headed downstairs. Jill dived into the pool gracefully while Nick admired her technique. There was a diving board, and Nick knew how to use it. He executed a flawless somersault dive, earning applause upon resurfacing. Annie was among those clapping. She knew every woman present desired him, including the movie stars in the pool. But for now, he was hers. As Annie watched Nick chat with Sam and Jill by the pool, Vic approached her and remarked, "You're just as stunning as those two." Annie glanced at him and replied, "He's very handsome. Tall and handsome." "Thanks, but your plan to win me over won't work. And in the end, you won't like the outcome," she warned. Vic smiled charmingly, feigning disappointment. He was definitely an actor. "Gil and Sam left the pool," Jill announced. "There are swimsuits upstairs for anyone who wants to swim. And on the tennis court, we'll have dancing to music with a DJ." Sam, Jill, and Nick approached Annie and Vince. Vince openly gazed at women. To Annie's surprise, he began staring at Nick. Annie asked Sam, "What does that mean?" Sam laughed. "He swings both ways." "Quite interesting," Sam explained. "Maybe you should keep an eye on Nick," Annie chuckled. If Nick leaves with him, I'll go to Mike, and maybe both of you too. Still wet, Jill and Sam moved closer to Annie, as if sharing a secret signal. They hugged her from each side until she broke away, jokingly sighing, "Just kidding, girls, kidding." Both women initially looked disappointed, but soon burst into laughter. Nick observed all this, and his swim trunks couldn't conceal his reaction, noticed by all the women. "Oh God, Nick, what's up?" Jill exclaimed. "You know, you saw it," Nick replied. Sam intervened. "But I didn't see it. Now it's my turn." She grabbed Nick's hand, leading him inside and upstairs. Annie followed, still dressed but damp from the hug, feeling the need to shield Nick from the predatory Sam if possible. She realized things were almost getting out of control, and the danger was escalating, yet she found herself less opposed to it. Following Annie was Jill, curious about what would unfold. The four found themselves in the master bedroom, where Nick had previously undressed. "We should get out of these wet clothes," Annie suggested. Jill cheered, letting her top drop to the floor. Before she could remove her bottom, Sam was already naked. Annie took a bit longer due to her dress and panties, but not much longer. Nick felt overwhelmed by the sexual tension in the room. He stood there, stunned by the way the women eyed each other, realizing that almost anything could happen, though he wasn't sure what he wanted. Well, that was technically a lie. He knew he wanted to be with all three of them, especially Sam, but it clashed with his stance on sexual ethics and marriage. However, his views had already shifted significantly. Despite the rules, Jill snuck up behind him, knelt down, and pulled down his swim trunks, revealing his private part. She then reached out and touched him, while Sam moved closer to Annie, embracing her and sharing a kiss, to which Annie responded. However, Jill then emerged from behind Nick and declared, "No more fooling around. The party's still going, and I'm the hostess. I won't let you three have fun without me." She tossed dresses to Sam and Annie for the pool, short ones. "I put one on myself." Nick remained naked, and the women eyed him. Annie asked, "How do we dress him?" Jill replied, "Why bother dressing him?" Sam added, "Because we might want him clothed if it comes to that." "We need to fend off Vince and those young girls," Annie said. "I never agreed to any of this." She tossed Nick his usual swim trunks and a t-shirt. Both others groaned. They all headed down to the tennis court where the dancing was happening. Mike approached Nick and asked, "Have you already slept with all three?" "No, although, gosh, we changed clothes right there in your bedroom, sorry." "But nothing special happened. Jill stopped everything, Mike. I couldn't resist. I guess I'm weak," Mike suggested. "I'm up for a swap tonight." Nick looked at him. "No." "That sounds interesting, but no, Jill's quite the leader. I just can't." "Oh, darn. My mother raised me wrong." Mike laughed and then said, "Well, at least I'll dance with her. Same with Sam." Mike took Annie to the dance floor to jitterbug. Annie looked at Nick, who waved at her. The crowd thinned out. Jill danced with Vic. Samantha approached Nick and guided him to the dance floor as the DJ switched to slow music. Nick pulled her close. Sam whispered in his ear, "I think it's time for us. Mike has Annie. He'll turn her on, and Jill will go for Vic." This was the ultimate test of his strength. His morals were tested too. He passed one test but failed the other. The whole party looked like a group of teens playing a risky game. When the slow music ended, Nick and Sam began dancing to the medium-fast beat. Sam danced exceptionally well. They moved together, and Nick began to feel aroused again. Sam reciprocated. They became lost in each other. Meanwhile, Mike was indeed turning Annie on, as expected. At first, he hesitated, recalling the last party, but Annie got excited, and Nick signaled her to go ahead, joining Mike on the dance floor. Jill and Vic weren't as enthusiastic. Jill was more interested in the other couples. Vic was fine, but Jill was keen on Sam and Nick. It felt like a twisted game of morality. Jill knew if Nick went with Sam, Annie would likely go upstairs with Mike, but she didn't know what would happen next. She was uncertain about her own actions if they split into pairs. She thought she might first join Mike and Annie, then maybe Sam and Nick. Vic was left out. Then, as planned, DJ Mick took a break. It was inconvenient because he was intrigued by the events on the dance floor, but union rules and all that. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, he said quietly, heading for a beer. Union rules. There were only 6 of them left, plus the staff. Everyone gathered around the table between the pool and the dance floor. There were a few sidelong glances, but little conversation and lots of tension. Jill spoke up. "I was wondering who I'd join first." This statement hit the table like a bomb. Annie held Mike's hand. Nick and Sam were seated on the love seat, with her legs resting on his lap. Jill was sitting on Vic, but he felt more like furniture than a participant. Right. Annie glanced at Nick, seeing that Sam might take him if she wished. At that instant, Annie resolved that Nick was her only man, and she didn't want to share him. She rose, releasing Mike's hand and swaying slowly, approached Nick and leaned down to kiss him. Nick kissed her back. Sam, still on his lap, overheard Annie whisper to Nick, "It's time to head home, my love. Enough excitement to hold us over until next time." Sam got up from Nick, who groaned. However, Annie pulled him close and wrapped her arm around his waist. Looking around, she stated, "I'm taking this man home, to where he belongs." On their way out, Nick grabbed the keys. In a trance-like state, Annie drove. Upon reaching home, she promptly led him to bed and undressed him. She enveloped him with her body and claimed him. They made love slowly and tenderly. Nick didn't think of Sam. He was fully present with his wife. Everyone experiences vulnerability at times, relying on others to ensure everything's all right, and we're fortunate if we have someone who can do that.